Another great episode today. Bill Cakmis was my guest. He's a performance coach, a media consultant, and show doctor, meaning he goes in to a show. It could be a reality television show. It could be a stage play. It could be your music show, and he fixes things. He makes it where the flow is better. He makes it so the actors or the musicians or whomever can connect better with an audience, and that's what we talked about. He's worked with actors, politicians, athletes, doctors, performers, and also musicians. That's why we had him on Music Business Radio. One of the things that was interesting is he goes in when there's a quote-unquote host problem. Let's say you've got a reality TV show, a contest show, or something where there's a host, maybe a talk radio show, like we've got at Music Business Radio. And if there's a host problem, he gets in there and he fixes it. He had some great advice, I thought, for musicians that you can take away. Because when you think about it, when you're on stage and you're running through songs for an audience, you're the host, and he certainly gave me some advice. Normally we do something we call Dave's Demo Derby, where at the end, Music Business Radio listeners from around the world, they send in their demos to us and we review them. But we actually had literally Dave's Demo Derby, and he reviewed me as the host of Music Business Radio, had some funny things to say, but was also very helpful. He was I thought he gave good advice, so it's going to be something we implement into the next episodes, and we'll see if it makes a change. He talked about interview techniques, what you can do when you're doing media, and what to do when you get those tough questions. We talked about body language, storytelling, how to understand an audience, speaking in sound bites. And again, stories from over 30 years in the business. Had a funny story about a host. Dick Clark had hired him to take care of a host problem. And he had a funny story about that. Communication is communication. We talked about that, where that's really the reason we had Bill on the episode today, because he doesn't just work with musicians. But if you're a politician, those guys are great at really communicating what they want. When you ask them a question, they're able to dodge it. And that's the same thing that musicians have to do sometimes. So had some great things about that. We talked about, is music enough? And the answer is no, it's not enough. That an audience wants to connect with you, so how can you connect better with them? Sometimes it's the stories between the songs that you're performing that actually do that. And Bill had some great advice on how to really get your pitch down, really get your delivery down when you're doing your onstage banter between songs. We talked about pacing and flow. We answered the question, is talent enough? And he gave a great statistic. This is an athletic statistic, but I think it would certainly apply to music. When we talked about talent versus technique, and he's working with an NFL player right now, and talked about how 93% of a good athlete, good athletics, is just practice. It's practicing the techniques. It's not necessarily natural talent, but it's that 7% that's going to make you all the difference in the world. Once you've got the 93, that's when your talent comes into play. You've got to have that 93% first. We talked about believability and authority. I loved what he talked about with new artists, about a stage persona versus real life, and how to develop that, how to get the attention of radio. We talked about a radio tour that he was consulting for, and what he did to make sure, I think it was a quote, to make sure everybody wasn't pissed off. That was a really funny story. Interview etiquette, interview techniques, handling tough questions, PR problems, and personal issues. We talked about all those things, how to handle those in the media. We talked about how to do a meet and greet, what's going to put you over the edge when it comes to really connecting with a lot of fans at once. We talked about fear of public performance, because a lot of people have it. Insecurity on stage, terrible insecurity on stage. I know bands, they don't perform live because of that. They don't put out videos. I know bands that barely put out music recorded. They just are, I don't know what they do. They're the perfectionist and they're insecure about the public performance. We talked about ways of how to get around that. So if you're scared of being on stage, Bill has some great advice for you. We talked about, again, interaction techniques. Talked about improv. Had a funny story about Robin Williams and what to do when you're on somebody who's just blowing you away when it comes to his talent, and you want to stick out on stage too, what you can do. One-man show versus a band. And we talked about the different skill sets of people in the music business. Songwriters have different skill sets than artists, and artists would have a different skill set than business person. And Bill had a lot of advice for things that you can try now. One of the things that he said, and I'm not sure if this actually made the show, I thought this was really interesting, was talking about how bands, when they're first starting out, they don't like to do their own booking because they feel it makes them look amateur. And he talked about how many bands will actually get a different persona and use a different name when they're doing booking. And I've heard this before. As a matter of fact, I had Ian from Jethro Tull come in, and he talked about this. He would change his name when he would call the club and get them booked. And he would also change the band name. That's actually how Jethro Tull is named Jethro Tull. That just happened to be the name that they had when the band actually stuck. So that's Ian Anderson, and that's at musicbusinessradio.com. But this episode from today, Bill Cakmis, great guy, really cool guy, and he's traveling all around. I know he talked about possibly doing some workshops here in Nashville, but he said 70% of his stuff is on the road these days. But if you're in Nashville, if you're interested in some performance workshops, and if you're not in Nashville and you want to send him a DVD or talk to him on the phone or have him look at your reel or your music or whatever you've got, he's got a website at Cakmis, Cakmis.com. Super cool guy. Looking forward to working with him in the future. Like I said, he gave me some really great advice as a host of the show, and we asked him for it because he has a different perspective than I certainly would have, or Gary and Dan, the guys that I've been basically doing this show with for the last 7 years. We're really, really close to it, so it was nice to have an outside consultant come in, and that's what Bill did for us. So Cakmis.com, check him out, and this episode will be edited shortly and available to you on musicbusinessradio.com. Thanks for listening. I'll see you soon when I interview another industry guest. Bye.